The morning briefing room at Naval Air Station Oceana buzzed with the usual pre-flight chatter when Captain Marcus Steele Rodriguez walked through the door. The conversation died instantly. Everyone knew that when a Navy SEAL captain showed up unannounced at a pilot briefing, something serious was about to happen. Lieutenant Sarah, Ghost Chen, sat in the back row, her flight suit crisp despite having been up since 0400 hours running diagnostics on her FA-18 Super Hornet. She watched Rodriguez scan the room with the cold precision that had made him a legend in Special Operations Command. His weathered face bore the kind of scars that came from real combat, not training accidents. The Bronze Star and Purple Heart ribbons on his chest told stories most people would never hear. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rodriguez began, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "I need combat pilots, not weekend warriors, not desk jockeys with wings, not anyone looking to pad their flight hours. I need pilots who can fly missions that don't officially exist." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. After 18 months of routine patrols and training exercises, the possibility of real action sparked something deep in her chest. She had graduated at the top of her class from Top Gun, earned her carrier qualifications ahead of schedule, and consistently posted the best scores in weapons systems training. Yet somehow, she always found herself assigned to the safe missions, while her male counterparts got the dangerous ones. Commander Jake Titan Morrison, sitting in the front row with his perfectly pressed uniform and political connections, raised his hand immediately. "Sir, I volunteer for whatever mission you have in mind. My record speaks for itself." Rodriguez barely glanced at him. "Your record shows you've never flown a combat mission outside of controlled training environments, Commander. This isn't about rank or connections." "Adder." The SEAL captain continued scanning the room, his eyes moving methodically from pilot to pilot. Sarah noticed he spent extra time studying each person's posture, their hands, the way they held themselves. He was reading them like a book, looking for something specific that she couldn't quite identify. "The mission requires precision flying in hostile territory with zero margin for error," Rodriguez explained. "We're talking about threading needles at 500 miles per hour while people shoot at you. The kind of flying that separates the exceptional from the merely competent." Lieutenant Commander Rick Viper Sullivan leaned forward eagerly. Sullivan had a reputation for aggressive flying and an ego to match. "Captain, I've logged over 2,000 flight hours in combat aircraft. I can handle whatever you're throwing at us. Flight hours don't mean much when you're flying through a mountain pass at night with enemy radar painting your aircraft," Rodriguez replied flatly. "I'm looking for someone who understands that sometimes the best way to complete a mission is to make the enemy think you're somewhere else entirely." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The SEAL captain was describing exactly the kind of tactical thinking that had earned her the call sign, Ghost. During a training exercise 6 months earlier, she had successfully penetrated a heavily defended airspace by using unconventional flight patterns and electronic countermeasures that made her aircraft nearly invisible to enemy sensors. The exercise controllers had called it the most innovative flying they had seen in years. Rodriguez's eyes finally settled on her corner of the room. "Lieutenant Chen, step forward." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Sarah felt every pair of eyes turn toward her as she stood and walked to the front of the briefing room. Her boots clicked against the polished floor with military precision, but inside, her mind was racing. Why had he singled her out? "Chen, your training records indicate you have an unusual approach to tactical flying," Rodriguez said, his tone neutral, but his eyes intense. "Tell me about the Nellis exercise." Sarah straightened her shoulders. "Sir, the exercise scenario called for penetrating a simulated enemy air defense network. Instead of trying to overpower their systems or fly around them, I analyzed their radar patterns and found gaps in their coverage that occurred when their operators rotated shifts. And then, I timed my approach to coincide with those gaps, used terrain masking and electronic jamming to become effectively invisible, and completed the mission without triggering a single alarm." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "The exercise controllers said, you made a billion-dollar defense system look like it was operated by children. I prefer to think of it as understanding that every system has weaknesses, sir. The key is being patient enough to find them, and disciplined enough to exploit them properly. Behind her, Sarah heard someone mutter, "Show off." She didn't turn around, but she recognized Sullivan's voice. The comment stung because she knew that if a male pilot had pulled off the same feat, he would have been praised for innovative thinking. When she did it, some people saw it as showing off. Rodriguez stepped closer, his eyes never leaving her face. "Chen, what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. We have intelligence indicating that a high-value target is being held in a facility that's considered impossible to reach by conventional means. The compound is built into a mountainside in hostile territory, surrounded by the most sophisticated anti-aircraft defenses money can buy." Sarah felt her mouth go dry. This was the kind of mission that pilot dreams were made of, and pilot nightmares too. The facility is located in a narrow valley with walls so steep that normal attack approaches are impossible. Rodriguez continued. The enemy has installed radar systems that can track anything larger than a bird flying within 50 miles of the target. They have surface-to-air missiles that can engage targets at any altitude we can reach with our aircraft. What makes you think it can be done, sir? Rodriguez smiled for the first time since entering the room. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Because, 15 years ago, I led a SEAL team into that same valley on foot. It took us 3 days to climb those mountains, and we lost 2 good men to enemy patrols. But I learned something important. Their defenses are designed to stop conventional attacks. They're not prepared for something they can't see coming. The pieces suddenly clicked together in Sarah's mind. You want someone who can fly through that valley without being detected. Exactly. But it's not just about stealth technology or electronic countermeasures. The geography of that valley means that any pilot attempting this mission will have to fly patterns that would be considered impossible under normal circumstances. Thread the needle flying through mountain passes. Altitude changes that would stress most aircraft to their limits. And all of it has to be done while maintaining complete radio silence. Sarah looked around the room at the other pilots. Morrison was pale, apparently realizing that his political connections wouldn't help him fly through a mountain pass. Sullivan was trying to maintain his cocky expression, but she could see uncertainty in his eyes. The other pilots looked equally sobered by the description of what Rodriguez was asking for. "Sir," Sarah said carefully, "you're describing a mission that would require intimate knowledge of the target area, weather patterns, enemy patrol schedules, and aircraft performance parameters that go beyond normal training." "That's correct, Lieutenant. Which is why this mission has been in planning stages for over 2 years. We've been waiting for the right pilot to become available." "Available, sir?" Rodriguez pulled a tablet from his jacket and tapped the screen several times before handing it to her. "Your psychological evaluations, flight training scores, and tactical thinking assessments have been monitored by Naval Special Warfare Command for the past 18 months. You scored higher than any pilot currently on active duty in the areas we consider essential for this type of operation." Sarah looked at the tablet screen and felt her world tilt slightly. The document displayed was classified at levels she didn't even know existed. Her name was at the top of a list that included some of the most decorated pilots in the Navy. But she was the only one marked with a green APPR VED designation. "Sir, I don't understand. If I'm supposedly the best candidate for this mission, why haven't I been given any challenging assignments? I've been flying routine patrols and training exercises for over a year." Rodriguez's expression hardened, because some people in the chain of command thought that keeping our best assets safe for when we really need them was more important than letting them prove themselves on routine missions. They were wrong, but that's a discussion for another time. The SEAL captain turned to address the room. "The rest of you are dismissed. Chen, you stay." As the other pilots filed out of the briefing room, Sarah caught snippets of their conversations. Some expressed relief at not being selected for what sounded like a suicide mission. Others, particularly Sullivan and Morrison, seemed resentful that they hadn't even been considered. When the room was empty, except for Rodriguez and herself, the SEAL captain's demeanor shifted slightly. He still radiated the same dangerous competence, but there was something more personal in his expression now. "Chen, I'm going to be completely honest with you. This mission has a high probability of failure. The target area is heavily defended. The flying conditions are extreme, and we can't provide you with backup if things go wrong. You'll be going in alone, at night, in an aircraft that's been modified in ways I can't discuss until you officially accept the mission. Sarah met his gaze steadily. What happens to the high-value target if this mission fails? He dies. And probably a lot of other people die with him over the next few months. And if I don't accept the mission? Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Then we keep looking for another pilot. And hope we find one before it's too late. But Chen, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've worked with some of the best warriors this country has ever produced. When I look at your records, when I watch how you think about tactical problems, I see something special. You don't just fly aircraft, you think like they're an extension of your own body. Sarah felt a familiar stirring in her chest, the same feeling she had experienced during her most challenging training flights. It was part fear, part excitement, and part of something deeper, the need to prove that she belonged among the elite. Sir, if I accept this mission, what guarantee do I have that it's not just a test? That I'm not being set up to fail so that someone can point to the failure and say that women pilots aren't capable of handling the most difficult assignments? Rodriguez's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger, but it wasn't directed at her. Chen, the man we're trying to extract has information that could prevent terrorist attacks in 6 major cities. The intelligence he possesses is worth more than any political considerations or gender politics. If I thought for 1 second that there was a better pilot for this job, regardless of gender, they would be standing here instead of you. The weight of his words settled on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. This wasn't about proving herself anymore, it was about saving lives. The realization brought with it a clarity that cut through all her doubts and fears. What do I need to know about the modified aircraft? Rodriguez smiled again, and this time it reached his eyes. Now you're asking the right questions. The aircraft is a specially modified FA-18 that's been equipped with experimental stealth technology and navigation systems that will allow you to fly through that mountain valley like you're following a highway map. The modifications also include enhanced electronic countermeasures and a weapons package designed specifically for this target. He handed her another tablet, this one showing technical specifications that made her eyes widen. The aircraft's capabilities were far beyond anything she had ever flown, but the requirements for the mission were equally extreme. The window for this mission opens in 72 hours, Rodriguez continued. That gives us 3 days to get you familiar with the aircraft modifications and brief you on every detail of the operation. You'll be training with equipment and technology that officially doesn't exist, under the supervision of people whose names you'll never know. Sarah looked at the mission parameters displayed on the tablet screen. The flight path through the mountain valley looked like something from a video game: impossible turns, altitude changes that would test both pilot and aircraft to their absolute limits, and timing requirements measured in seconds rather than minutes. Sir, assuming I can master the flying requirements, what about the extraction itself? How do I get the target out of a heavily fortified facility? That's not your job, Chen. Your job is to deliver a SEAL team to within 500 meters of the facility, wait for their signal, and then extract them along with the target. The SEALs will handle everything that happens on the ground. How many SEALs? 4, plus the target. Your aircraft will need to land on what barely qualifies as a landing strip, in complete darkness, with enemy forces potentially closing in on your position. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she absorbed the full scope of what Rodriguez was asking her to do. It was the kind of mission that pilots dreamed about and feared in equal measure, the ultimate test of skill, courage, and judgment. Sir, I need to ask one more question. Why me specifically? You said I scored higher than other pilots in certain areas. But what made you decide I was the right person for this particular mission? Rodriguez was silent for several seconds, his expression thoughtful. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of experience that came from years of life or death decisions. Chen, in my line of work, I've learned to recognize a specific quality in people. It's not courage. Plenty of people have courage. It's not skill. Skill can be taught. It's the ability to remain completely calm and focused when everything around you is falling apart. To make the right decisions when failure means death, not just for you, but for everyone counting on you. He paused, studying her face. 6 months ago, you were flying a training mission when another pilot experienced a mechanical failure that put him into an uncontrolled spin at low altitude. Instead of following standard procedure and calling for emergency services, you positioned your aircraft to guide him through a recovery procedure that saved his life. The whole thing lasted less than 30 seconds, but the way you handled that situation told me everything I needed to know about how you perform under pressure. Sarah remembered that flight clearly. Lieutenant David Kim had experienced a hydraulic failure that caused his aircraft to enter a flat spin at just 3,000 feet, barely enough altitude for a parachute to deploy. Without thinking, she had maneuvered her aircraft into position and talked him through a recovery procedure that most pilots would never have attempted in such a short time frame. Sir, that was exactly the kind of thinking this mission requires. Rodriguez interrupted. Split-second decisions, unconventional solutions, and the ability to stay focused when lives are on the line. Kim went home to his wife and kids that day because you did something that most pilots would consider impossible. The memory brought back the feeling Sarah had experienced that day, the moment when training and instinct merged into something greater than the sum of their parts. It was the feeling of being exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. What happens if I say yes? Then you disappear for the next 3 days. As far as anyone else is concerned, you've been selected for a classified training program. When you come back, assuming the mission is successful, you'll return to your regular duties. This conversation never happened. The mission never took place, and the people you save will never know your name. Sarah looked around the empty briefing room, thinking about the routine patrols and training exercises that had filled her days for the past year. Then she thought about the high-value target waiting in an enemy facility, about the terrorist attacks that could be prevented, about the lives that hung in the balance. When she met Rodriguez's eyes again, her voice was steady and certain. Sir, when do we start? The hangar that Rodriguez led her to wasn't on any official base map. Located 3 miles from the main airfield, it was surrounded by security fences that looked like they could stop a tank. Armed guards checked Rodriguez's credentials twice before allowing them through the gates. And Sarah noticed that the men watching them weren't regular military police. These were operators she could tell by the way they moved, the way their eyes never stopped scanning for threats. Inside the hangar sat the most beautiful aircraft Sarah had ever seen. At first glance, it looked like a standard F/A-18 Super Hornet. But as they got closer, she began to notice the differences. The skin of the aircraft had an almost liquid quality to it, reflecting light in ways that made it difficult to focus on. Strange antenna arrays sprouted from locations where she had never seen them before, and the engine intakes had been modified with what looked like additional venting systems. Meet your ride, Rodriguez said, his voice carrying a note of pride. Officially, this aircraft doesn't exist. The people who built it call it the Shadow Hornet. A woman in civilian clothes approached them from the far side of the hangar. She was in her 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the kind of focused intensity that Sarah associated with the best aircraft technicians. Her hands were stained with hydraulic fluid and engine oil, the marks of someone who worked on aircraft rather than just talking about them. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the woman introduced herself, extending a hand that was surprisingly strong. I'm the project engineer for this modification program. Captain Rodriguez tells me you're going to be taking my baby into some very unfriendly skies. What exactly did you do to it? Sarah asked, walking around the aircraft in a slow circle. The more she looked, the more differences she spotted from a standard Super Hornet. The short version: we took everything that makes an F/A-18 detectable by enemy sensors and either eliminated it or made it controllable, Dr. Vasquez explained. The long version would take about 6 hours and require a security clearance that doesn't officially exist. Rodriguez checked his watch. Dr. Vasquez, we have 72 hours to get Lieutenant Chen qualified on this aircraft. What's the training schedule? Aggressive, the engineer replied with a slight smile. Chen, how many hours do you have in Super Hornets? 843 hours, including carrier operations and weapons training. Good. That means I don't have to teach you how to fly. I just have to teach you how to fly invisibly. Dr. Vasquez gestured toward the aircraft. The stealth modifications are the most obvious changes, but they're not the most important ones. This aircraft has been equipped with a navigation system that can guide you through terrain at speeds and altitudes that would be impossible with standard equipment. She led them to a ladder that provided access to the cockpit. Sarah climbed up and settled into the pilot's seat, immediately noticing that the instrument panel looked like something from a science fiction movie. Additional displays showed information she had never seen before, and several controls had been added that weren't part of standard aircraft systems. The terrain-following radar has been upgraded to provide resolution accurate to within 2 meters, Dr. Vasquez explained from the ladder beside the cockpit. Combined with the navigation computer, it means you can fly through mountain passes in complete darkness, like you're following painted lines on a runway. Sarah studied the new displays, trying to understand how the systems integrated with the standard flight controls. What about the stealth systems? How do I control those? That's the beautiful part, you don't have to. The aircraft's computer monitors all electromagnetic emissions from the aircraft and automatically adjusts the stealth systems to minimize your signature. Your job is to fly the mission profile, and the aircraft will make you virtually invisible to enemy sensors. Rodriguez climbed up to the other side of the cockpit. Chen, the mission profile has been programmed into the navigation system, but you'll need to understand every detail of the flight path because the computer can't make tactical decisions for you. Dr. Vasquez handed her a tablet loaded with what looked like the most detailed topographical maps Sarah had ever seen. The target valley was displayed in 3 dimensions, with every rock formation, every tree, every building marked and measured. The flight path through the valley looked like a roller coaster designed by someone with a twisted sense of humor. The approach vector takes you through 4 separate mountain passes before reaching the target valley, Dr. Vasquez explained. Each pass requires different flying techniques, different altitudes, and different stealth configurations. You'll need to master all of them. Sarah traced the flight path with her finger, noting the altitude changes and the tight turns required to navigate between the mountain walls. What's the margin for error? In some sections, less than 50 feet on either side, Rodriguez answered grimly. Hit a mountain wall at 500 miles per hour, and there won't be enough pieces left to identify. Dr. Vasquez activated one of the new displays, and suddenly Sarah was looking at a 3-dimensional representation of the first mountain pass. The display was so detailed that she could see individual trees on the mountainsides. This is the synthetic vision system. It combines data from multiple sensors to give you a perfect view of the terrain ahead, even in complete darkness or bad weather. How accurate is it? We tested it by flying through the Grand Canyon at night with the pilot wearing a blindfold, Dr. Vasquez said matter-of-factly. The system guided the aircraft through the canyon without the pilot ever looking outside the cockpit. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The technology was impressive, but it also meant that the mission planners expected her to fly in conditions where normal visual navigation would be impossible. Rodriguez pulled out another tablet and handed it to her. These are the profiles of the SEAL team you'll be transporting. You need to understand who you're working with. The first profile showed a man who looked like he could bench press a small car. Staff Sergeant Mike Hammer Johnson, explosives specialist, 12 years in special operations. The second was a wiry man with intelligent eyes, Petty Officer First Class Tony Wire Martinez, communications and electronics expert. The third looked like he could disappear into shadows at will, Chief Petty Officer Alex Phantom Thompson, reconnaissance and surveillance specialist. What about the team leader? Sarah asked. Rodriguez smiled slightly. You're looking at him. I'll be leading this team personally. The implications of that statement hit her immediately. If a SEAL captain was personally leading a 4-man team, the mission was more important than she had initially understood. Captains didn't usually go into the field unless the stakes were extremely high. Sir, can you tell me anything about the high-value target? Rodriguez's expression became serious. His name is Dr. Ahmad Hassan. He's a nuclear physicist who was working on weapons programs for a terrorist organization. 3 weeks ago, he made contact with one of our intelligence assets and indicated that he wanted to defect. He has information about planned attacks using radiological weapons, dirty bombs, that could kill thousands of people in major American cities. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She had assumed the mission was important, but the prospect of preventing nuclear terrorism made it feel much more urgent. The problem, Rodriguez continued, is that Hassan's handlers have become suspicious. Our intelligence indicates that they plan to move him to a more secure location within the next week. This may be our only chance to extract him. Dr. Vasquez gestured toward the aircraft. Which is why we need to start your training immediately. Chen, are you ready for the most intensive 3 days of flying you've ever experienced? Sarah looked at the modified Super Hornet, thinking about the mountain passes she would need to navigate and the lives that depended on the success of the mission. What's the first step? We start with simulator training, Dr. Vasquez replied. The computer simulation is so accurate that pilots sometimes forget they're not actually flying. We've programmed the exact mission profile into the simulator, including weather conditions and enemy defenses. They spent the next 6 hours in the simulator, with Sarah flying the mission profile over and over again until she could navigate the mountain passes without consciously thinking about the control inputs required. The synthetic vision system took some getting used to, but by the end of the session, she was beginning to understand how it could allow her to fly in conditions that would be impossible with conventional instruments. The hardest part wasn't the technical flying, it was the psychological challenge of flying through mountain passes with walls so close on either side that she could see individual rocks on the mountainsides. The simulator was so realistic that her body reacted as if she were actually flying at high speed through terrain that left no room for error. How am I doing? She asked Dr. Vasquez after completing her 20th run through the simulation. Your flying is exceptional, the engineer replied. Your times are consistently better than our test pilots achieved, and you're making fewer errors with each run. But there's one thing that concerns me. What's that? You're flying like someone who's afraid of making mistakes. In the real mission, you'll need to fly with complete confidence. Even when the margins are impossibly tight, hesitation or second-guessing could be fatal. Rodriguez, who had been watching the simulation runs from a nearby console, walked over to them. Chen, Dr. Vasquez is right. The difference between success and failure on this mission won't be technical skill, you've already proven you have that. It will be your ability to trust your training and your instincts when everything around you is telling you that what you're doing is impossible. Sir, it's hard not to be cautious when the computer is showing me mountain walls 50 feet away from my wingtips. I understand that. But tomorrow, when you fly the actual aircraft through those mountains, you'll need to embrace the danger instead of fighting against it. The aircraft and its systems are designed to keep you safe, but only if you trust them completely. They broke for dinner in the hangar's small break room, where Sarah met the 3 SEAL team members who would be her passengers. Johnson was exactly as intimidating in person as his photo suggested, but he had an easy smile and a surprisingly gentle way of speaking. Martinez was constantly checking and adjusting electronic devices, his fingers moving with the kind of precision that came from years of working with delicate equipment. Thompson was quiet and watchful, but when he spoke, his comments were thoughtful and often unexpectedly humorous. So you're the pilot who's going to thread the needle for us, Johnson said, extending a hand that engulfed Sarah's completely. Rodriguez told us you can make an F.A. 18 dance through mountain passes like it's a ballet. I'm still learning the dance steps, Sarah replied. But Dr. Vasquez has built an incredible aircraft. The technology is beyond anything I've ever worked with. Martinez looked up from the tablet he was studying. The important question is whether you can fly it when the technology fails. Because on missions like this, something always goes wrong. What kind of failures are we talking about? Could be anything, Thompson said quietly. Enemy jamming that knocks out your navigation systems, weather that reduces visibility to 0, mechanical failures that force you to improvise. The mark of a great pilot isn't how well they fly when everything works, it's how well they adapt when everything breaks. Rodriguez joined the conversation. That's actually a good point, Chen. Tomorrow we're going to run some simulation scenarios where systems fail at the worst possible moments. You'll need to be prepared for anything. They spent the evening reviewing every aspect of the mission in exhaustive detail. The target facility was built into the side of a mountain, with the landing zone located in a narrow valley about half a mile from the main building. The SEALs would have approximately 30 minutes to reach the facility, locate Hassan, and return to the aircraft. If they took longer than that, enemy reinforcements would likely arrive and make extraction impossible. What happens if the extraction takes longer than planned? Sarah asked. Then you leave without us. Rodriguez replied without hesitation. The intelligence Hassan possesses is more valuable than any of our individual lives, including his own. If the extraction fails, you abort the mission and return to base. Sarah felt a chill at the matter-of-fact way Rodriguez discussed the possibility of being left behind. Sir, I'm not comfortable with that scenario. Comfort isn't part of this equation, Chen. If we're not at the landing zone within the time limit, it means we're either dead or captured. In either case, staying to look for us would accomplish nothing except giving the enemy access to classified aircraft technology. Johnson leaned forward, his expression serious but not unfriendly. Chen, this is what we signed up for when we joined the teams. We understand the risks, and we accept them. What we need from you is the confidence that you'll make the hard decisions if circumstances require it. The weight of command responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders like a heavy blanket. She had always known that military service involved life and death decisions, but the abstract knowledge was different from sitting across a table from the men whose lives would depend on her judgment. I understand, she said finally, but I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that scenario doesn't happen. Thompson smiled slightly. That's exactly the attitude we want to hear. Just remember that sometimes the best way to save lives is to accept that some risks are worth taking. They spent the next 2 hours going over communication protocols, emergency procedures, and contingency plans for various scenarios that could develop during the mission. By the time they finished, Sarah felt like she had been preparing for this mission her entire career. The second day began before dawn with actual flight training in the modified Super Hornet. The aircraft handled differently from a standard FA-18, partly because of the stealth modifications and partly because of the additional electronic systems. But after an hour of familiarization flights, Sarah began to understand how the modifications actually improved the aircraft's capabilities. The stealth systems reduced drag in addition to minimizing radar signature. Dr. Vasquez explained over the radio as Sarah flew practice approaches to the base. You should notice that the aircraft is more responsive and requires less power to maintain speed. Sarah was indeed noticing differences in how the aircraft handled, but they were all positive changes. The modified Hornet felt more precise, more responsive to her control inputs. It was like driving a precision instrument instead of a piece of heavy machinery. How does it handle in tight turns? She asked. Try the canyon run simulation we set up, Dr. Vasquez replied. But remember, these are friendly skies. The real mission won't give you the luxury of multiple practice runs. Sarah banked the aircraft toward a series of ridges that had been set up to simulate the mountain passes she would encounter during the actual mission. Flying between the ridges required the kind of precision that left no room for error. But the aircraft's handling characteristics made it feel almost easy. For the first time since accepting the mission, she began to believe that it might actually be possible to succeed. How's it feeling up there? Rodriguez's voice came through her headset. Like the aircraft was designed specifically for this type of flying, Sarah replied, threading the Hornet between two ridges with less than 70 feet of clearance on either side. The handling is incredible. Good, because tomorrow night you'll be doing this in complete darkness, in hostile territory, with people shooting at you. The reminder brought Sarah back to reality. The practice flights were impressive, but the real mission would involve challenges that couldn't be simulated on a training range. That afternoon, they ran failure scenarios in the simulator. Dr. Vasquez and her team threw every possible malfunction at Sarah navigation system, failures, engine problems, electrical malfunctions, even simulated battle damage. Each scenario required her to improvise solutions while continuing to fly through treacherous terrain at high speed. The key is not to panic when systems fail, Dr. Vasquez explained after Sarah had successfully completed a simulated approach with half her instruments offline. Trust your basic flying skills and use whatever systems are still working. What if everything fails? Then you fly by sight and instinct, the way pilots did before computers existed. The aircraft is still capable of completing the mission even if every electronic system fails, as long as the pilot is skilled enough to handle manual flight. The simulation where everything failed was the most challenging flying Sarah had ever attempted. Without the terrain-following radar, synthetic vision system, or navigation computer, she had to rely entirely on visual cues and her own judgment to navigate through the mountain passes. It took her 7 attempts to complete the course without crashing into a mountain, but by the end, she felt confident that she could handle even the worst-case scenarios. "Impressive," Rodriguez commented after watching her final successful run. "Most pilots can't complete that simulation, even after weeks of practice." "What made the difference?" Dr. Vasquez asked. Sarah thought about the question for a moment. "I stopped trying to fly the mission the same way I would with all systems working. Instead, I modified my approach to work with whatever systems I had available." Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "Exactly the kind of thinking this mission requires. Adaptation and improvisation when the plan doesn't survive contact with reality." As the second day ended, Sarah felt more confident about the technical aspects of the mission. She understood the aircraft, the navigation systems, and the flight profile. But she also understood that the real test would come when she had to execute everything under combat conditions. "One more day of training," Dr. Vasquez announced as they secured the aircraft in the hangar. "Tomorrow we'll run the full mission profile in real time, including the extraction scenario." Sarah looked at the modified Super Hornet sitting in the hangar, its strange modifications gleaming under the fluorescent lights. In 36 hours, she would be flying this aircraft into hostile territory on a mission that could save thousands of lives. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. The final day of training began at 0300 hours, with a complete dress rehearsal of the entire mission. Sarah suited up in her flight gear while the SEAL team prepared their equipment in the hangar's adjoining armory. The modified Super Hornet sat ready on the tarmac, its engines already warmed up by Dr. Vasquez's maintenance crew. "Remember," Rodriguez said as he conducted his final briefing, "once we're wheels up, radio silence until we reach the extraction point. The enemy has sophisticated listening equipment, and even encrypted communications could compromise our position." Sarah nodded, checking her flight plan one last time. The route to the target would take them over 800 miles of hostile territory, requiring precise timing to avoid enemy patrols and radar installations. The weather forecast showed clear skies but strong crosswinds in the mountain passes, not ideal conditions, but manageable. "Chen." Dr. Vasquez approached her with a small device that looked like a modified smartphone. "This is a backup navigation unit. If the aircraft systems fail completely, this will still give you basic position and heading information. It's hardened against electromagnetic interference and has enough battery life to get you home." Sarah clipped the device to her flight suit. "Let's hope I don't need it." "Let's hope not. But if you do, remember that the device only provides information. Getting home will still depend on your flying skills." The training mission went flawlessly. Sarah flew the complete route profile, while the SEAL team practiced their insertion and extraction procedures. The aircraft's stealth systems worked perfectly, rendering them virtually invisible to the simulated enemy defenses. When they landed back at the secret hangar, Sarah felt ready for the real mission. "Outstanding flying," Rodriguez commented as they climbed down from the aircraft. "You're handling that machine like you've been flying it for years. It helps that Dr. Vasquez built an incredible aircraft. I've never flown anything that responded so precisely to control inputs." Dr. Vasquez was already conducting post-flight checks on the aircraft systems. "Everything looks perfect. Chen, the aircraft is ready for the mission. The question is, are you?" Sarah looked around the hangar at the faces of the people who would be depending on her tomorrow night. Rodriguez and his team were seasoned professionals who had risked their lives countless times in service to their country. Dr. Vasquez and her engineers had spent years developing technology that could make the impossible mission succeed. The weight of their trust and expectation was both humbling and motivating. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it. The next 18 hours passed slowly. Sarah tried to rest, but her mind kept running through the mission profile. imagining every possible scenario that could develop. Once they entered hostile airspace, she reviewed the intelligence reports on enemy defenses, studied satellite photos of the target area, and memorized the faces of friendly personnel who might be in the area. At 2,100 hours, she reported to the hangar for final preparations. The SEAL team was already there, checking their equipment with the methodical precision of professionals who understood that overlooked details could be fatal. Rodriguez was studying intelligence updates on his tablet, his face grim. "What's the latest?" Sarah asked. "Mixed news. The good news is that Hassan is definitely still at the target location. Our surveillance confirms that he was moved to a holding cell in the main facility yesterday morning. And the bad news? Enemy security has been increased. They've added 2 more guard patrols and installed additional radar equipment near the landing zone. The window for extraction has been shortened from 30 minutes to 20. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. 20 minutes was barely enough time for the SEAL team to reach the facility, locate Hassan, and return to the aircraft, and that assumed everything went according to plan. "Can the mission still succeed with the shorter window?" she asked. Johnson looked up from the weapons he was checking. "It'll be tight, but we can make it work. The bigger concern is the additional radar coverage. Will that affect your approach?" Dr. Vasquez had been listening to the conversation while making final adjustments to the aircraft's systems. The stealth modifications should handle the additional radar, but Chen will need to be even more precise with her flight path. Any deviation from the planned route could expose the aircraft to detection. Sarah walked around the aircraft one final time, checking systems and running through her pre-flight checklist. Everything looked perfect, but she knew that the real test would come when they encountered actual enemy defenses. At 2,230 hours, they climbed into the aircraft. The SEAL team settled into the passenger compartment, their equipment secured and weapons checked. Rodriguez took the seat directly behind Sarah, where he could monitor communications and provide tactical guidance if needed. "Tower, this is Shadow 1 requesting permission to taxi," Sarah called over the radio, using the mission call sign for the first time. "Shadow 1. You are cleared to taxi. Winds are 270 at 15. Gusting to 22. Good hunting." Sarah taxied the modified Super Hornet to the runway, running through her final systems checks as they rolled. Everything showed green on her instruments. The aircraft felt solid and responsive, like a precision instrument ready for the most important performance of its existence. "Shadow 1, you are cleared for takeoff. Godspeed." Sarah pushed the throttles forward and felt the aircraft accelerate down the runway. The takeoff was smooth and powerful, with the modified engines providing more thrust than a standard Super Hornet. As they climbed into the night sky, she activated the stealth systems and watched as their radar signature disappeared from her defensive displays. For the next 4 hours, they flew through darkness toward the target area. Sarah navigated around known enemy radar installations and patrol areas, using the aircraft's advanced systems to remain invisible to enemy sensors. The flight was routine until they reached the mountain range that surrounded their target. "Beginning approach to Mountain Pass Alpha," Sarah announced over the internal communication system. The first mountain pass appeared on her synthetic vision display as a narrow canyon carved between towering peaks. Even with the advanced navigation systems, flying through the pass required constant attention and precise control inputs. The walls rose on either side like gigantic monuments, so close that Sarah could see individual rock formations in her displays. Altitude 2,000 feet. Speed 450 knots. She called out, maintaining the precise flight profile that would keep them below enemy radar coverage while avoiding collision with the mountains. The aircraft handled beautifully, responding to her control inputs with the kind of precision that made dangerous flying feel almost routine. But Sarah knew that the real challenges lay ahead, in the narrow passes that led to the target valley. "Pass Alpha complete, beginning approach to Pass Bravo," she announced 15 minutes later. Pass Bravo was narrower and required a series of tight turns that stressed both pilot and aircraft. Sarah felt the G-forces pressing her into her seat as she maneuvered through the switchback turns, but the aircraft never missed a beat. The stealth systems continued to function perfectly, keeping them invisible to the enemy radar installations scattered throughout the mountain range. "How are we doing back there?" Sarah asked over the intercom. "Like riding in a luxury car," Johnson replied. Smoothest insertion flight I've ever experienced. But Sarah knew that the most challenging part of the flight was still ahead. Past Charlie required flying through a canyon so narrow that the aircraft's wingtips would be less than 30 feet from the rock walls on either side. According to the mission briefing, this was the section where most simulation runs failed. Beginning approach to Past Charlie. Everyone hold on, this is going to get interesting. The canyon appeared on her displays like a crack in the earth, barely wide enough for the aircraft to pass through. Sarah lined up with the entrance to the canyon, checking and rechecking her approach angle. There would be no room for error once she committed to the passage. Entering Past Charlie, she announced, pushing the throttles forward slightly to maintain airspeed through the canyon. The walls of the canyon rose around them like the walls of a cathedral, their surfaces worn smooth by millions of years of wind and weather. Sarah kept her eyes focused on the flight displays, trusting the synthetic vision system to guide her through the passage. The slightest deviation from the programmed flight path would result in collision with the canyon walls. Halfway through the passage, her defensive systems detected enemy radar, attempting to lock onto their aircraft. For a few seconds, Sarah's heart rate spiked as she waited to see if the stealth systems would protect them. Then the radar signal faded, unable to maintain a lock on their nearly invisible aircraft. "Contact lost," she announced with relief. "Stealth systems holding." They emerged from Past Charlie into a wider valley, but Sarah knew that their most challenging flying was still ahead. The target valley required an approach that would take them between mountain peaks barely 200 feet apart, a maneuver that even the simulation had difficulty rendering accurately. 10 minutes to target area, she announced. Beginning final approach sequence. The entrance to the target valley appeared on her displays as what looked like a crack in a mountain wall. Sarah began her descent, following a flight path that took advantage of terrain features to minimize their exposure to enemy sensors. Every control input had to be perfect, there was no room for corrections or second attempts. "Final approach to target valley," she called out, feeling her heart rate increase despite her training. The aircraft slipped between the mountain peaks with only feet to spare on either side. Sarah could see the rock formations clearly in her displays, so close that it felt like she could reach out and touch them. The synthetic vision system painted the rocks in perfect detail, but knowing that she was flying through a passage barely wider than the aircraft's wingspan required every ounce of her concentration and skill. Then they were through, emerging into the target valley with the enemy facility clearly visible ahead. Sarah immediately began her approach to the landing zone, a flat area about half a mile from the main building. The landing would have to be perfect, there was no runway, just a patch of ground that intelligence reports indicated was solid enough to support the aircraft's weight. Landing zone in sight. Beginning final approach. Sarah reduced power and configured the aircraft for landing. Using every technique she had learned about short-field operations, the ground rushing up toward them looked rough and uninviting. But her instruments indicated it was within acceptable limits for a combat landing. The touchdown was firm but controlled, with the aircraft's wheels making contact exactly where Sarah had intended. She immediately applied brakes and reverse thrust, bringing the aircraft to a stop with room to spare. "We're down," she announced. "SEAL team, you are go for insertion." The passenger compartment door opened, and Rodriguez led his team into the darkness. Sarah watched them disappear toward the enemy facility, then settled in to wait. According to the mission plan, they had 20 minutes to locate Hassan and return to the aircraft. Sarah kept the engines running at idle power, ready for immediate takeoff if the situation deteriorated. Her defensive systems showed no immediate threats, but she knew that could change rapidly if enemy forces detected their presence. 15 minutes passed with no communication from the SEAL team. Sarah began to worry that they had encountered problems inside the facility. The mission plan called for radio silence, but the teams were supposed to send a brief status signal every 10 minutes. At 18 minutes, her defensive systems detected vehicle movement on the road leading to the facility. Enemy reinforcements were approaching, and the SEAL team was still inside the building. Sarah faced the most difficult decision of her military career. The mission parameters were clear: if the team wasn't back within the time limit, she was supposed to abort and return to base. But leaving Rodriguez and his team behind felt like abandoning everything she believed in about military service and loyalty. At 19 minutes and 30 seconds, she saw figures running toward the aircraft from the direction of the facility. 4 SEAL team members and a 5th person who had to be Hassan were sprinting across the open ground toward her position. Extraction team approaching. Rodriguez's voice crackled through her headset. We have the package, but we've got company about 2 minutes behind us. Sarah began spooling up the engines as the team reached the aircraft. Rodriguez was the last person through the door, and Sarah could see muzzle flashes in the darkness behind him as enemy forces opened fire on their position. We're all aboard, Rodriguez called out. Get us out of here. Sarah released the brakes and pushed the throttles to full power. The aircraft accelerated across the rough ground, bouncing and shaking as it built up speed for takeoff. Behind them, she could see headlights and more muzzle flashes as enemy forces reached the landing zone. At the last possible moment, Sarah pulled back on the stick and felt the aircraft leave the ground. They were airborne, but barely, with mountain walls rising ahead of them and enemy forces now fully alert to their presence. Defensive systems showing multiple radar locks, Sarah announced as she climbed toward the mountain pass that would take them away from the target area. The flight path out of the valley was even more challenging than the approach, requiring them to gain altitude while maneuvering through narrow passes. Enemy search radars were now actively hunting for them, and several surface-to-air missile sites had come online. Missile launch detected. Sarah's defensive systems announced with mechanical calm. Sarah immediately began evasive maneuvers, using the terrain to break the missile's guidance lock while maintaining enough speed to clear the mountain peaks ahead. The missile passed beneath them, confused by the aircraft's stealth systems and Sarah's evasive flying. That was too close, Johnson commented from the passenger compartment. We're not clear yet, Sarah replied, threading the aircraft through another narrow pass while her systems detected additional missile launches. Hold on, this is going to get rough. For the next 30 minutes, Sarah flew the most challenging mission of her career. Enemy forces had been fully alerted, and she had to use every technique she had learned to keep the aircraft invisible while navigating through the treacherous mountain terrain. Twice, missiles came close enough that she could see their exhaust trails, but each time her combination of stealth technology and tactical flying allowed them to escape detection. When they finally cleared the mountain range and entered friendly airspace, Sarah felt the tension drain from her body like water from a broken dam. They had done it. Hassan was safe, the SEAL team was intact, and the mission was complete. Outstanding flying, Rodriguez said over the intercom. Chen, that was some of the best tactical flying I've ever seen. The aircraft did most of the work, Sarah replied, though she knew that wasn't entirely true. The technology had been crucial, but success had ultimately depended on her ability to make split-second decisions under extreme pressure. Dr. Hassan, who had remained silent during the flight, finally spoke up. I want to thank all of you. The information I have will prevent attacks that would have killed thousands of innocent people. Sarah felt a warm satisfaction that had nothing to do with the successful completion of a challenging mission. They had saved lives, potentially thousands of lives, and proven that even the most impossible missions could succeed with the right combination of technology, training, and human skill. When they landed at the secret hangar 3 hours later, Sarah was exhausted but exhilarated. Dr. Vasquez was waiting for them, along with several intelligence officers who immediately whisked Hassan away for debriefing. How did the aircraft perform? Dr. Vasquez asked as Sarah climbed down from the cockpit. Flawlessly. Every system worked exactly as designed, even under combat conditions. Rodriguez approached them, his face showing the satisfaction of a mission successfully completed. Chen, I have good news and bad news. The good news is that the mission was a complete success. Hassan's information has already led to the prevention of 3 planned terrorist attacks. What's the bad news? Rodriguez smiled. There's no bad news. I just wanted to see your reaction. Chen, you've just proven that you're one of the best tactical pilots in the Navy. I suspect your career is about to get much more interesting. As Sarah walked away from the modified Super Hornet, she reflected on the events of the past 4 days. She had started as a pilot flying routine training missions, dismissed by some as not ready for the most challenging assignments. She was ending as someone who had successfully completed one of the most difficult missions in recent military history. More importantly, she had proven to herself that she belonged among the elite. When the stakes were highest and the margins for error were non-existent, She had performed with exactly the kind of calm precision that separated great pilots from merely good ones. The next morning, Sarah returned to her regular squadron to find that word of her exceptional performance had somehow preceded her. Her commanding officer called her into his office with a smile on his face and new orders in his hand. "Chen, it seems that certain people in very high places have taken notice of your capabilities. How do you feel about a transfer to the Navy's most elite tactical flying unit?" Sarah looked at the orders, seeing assignment to a squadron that didn't officially exist, and missions that would never appear in any public record. It was everything she had ever wanted as a military pilot, the chance to serve at the highest levels, using her skills to protect people who would never know her name. "Sir, when do I start?" 6 months later, Lieutenant Sarah Ghost Chen was leading her own flight of modified aircraft, on missions that pushed the boundaries of what was possible with current technology. She had become exactly what Rodriguez had seen in her during that first briefing, a pilot who could remain calm under pressure, think tactically under stress, and accomplish the impossible when lives depended on her skills. The reputation she had built on one perfect night of flying through hostile mountains had opened doors to a career that exceeded her highest aspirations. More importantly, it had proven that excellence recognized no boundaries, that when the mission mattered most, the best person for the job was simply the person who could get it done. In the competitive world of military aviation, Sarah had learned that being underestimated was sometimes an advantage. While others had focused on politics and connections, she had quietly built the skills that mattered when everything was on the line. When Captain Rodriguez retired 2 years later, he requested that Sarah be present at the ceremony. In his farewell speech, he told the assembled officers about a mission that officially never happened, flown by a pilot whose name would never appear in any history book. "The mark of a true warrior," he concluded, "is not the ability to perform well when everyone is watching, but the ability to excel when no one will ever know what you've accomplished, except the people whose lives you've saved." Sarah stood at attention as Rodriguez spoke, knowing that she had found her place among the warriors who operated in the shadows, protecting people who would never know their names or understand the sacrifices made on their behalf. It was exactly where she belonged.